Welcome. On the 21st of February 1965, Malcolm X fell to his death after being shot by 3 or maybe more members of Nation of Islam, of the group that he served for more than a decade from the 50s till the early 60s. Malcolm X is an iconic movement of Black liberation in the United States. At the same time, he had some views that were, to put it mildly, controversial. And today we're going to go through his history as it is portrayed in his autobiography, the autobiography of Malcolm X, which I have to say is a fascinating book. And we're going to see whether he should be celebrated or he should not be celebrated, or why we celebrate him, or what do we make of him. We are with Mark today. Mark, any early thoughts on Malcolm X?
I don't want to jump to the punchline. I feel like the most valuable part of Malcolm X was his redemption, was his second redemption, I would say, because he was sort of a criminal. And I think the Nation of Islam helped him straighten his life out and gave him a path and a purpose for sure. But to me, it's not till he did his pilgrimage to Mecca that he discovered something much wider and embraced, I think, the civil rights movement in the way that I think it's appropriate. But I don't want to steal thunder. We got a lot to cover.
That's the point. So even if you're not interested in the politics of Malcolm X, today is going to be an interesting story of redemption and an interesting story of serious flaws and attempts to redeem these flaws. So he's born in Malcolm Little, as was his original name. He's born in 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. His father is someone who is already involved in the Black separatist movement. Now, notice, separatist movement. So the idea was that the American society is so racist that there is no way to fix it. Therefore, Blacks should form their own society, either somewhere in the US or go somewhere else. And you could say, well, that's a stupid idea. There are historical records that many of the family members of Malcolm X's father was murdered by white supremacists. So we're not only talking about someone who is facing racism, someone who has his family members literally being murdered. Again, this was the early 20th century. Obviously, things were quite different. So there are 3 key moments in the childhood of Malcolm that would play a significant role in his racial view of the world. The first is when his house is literally set on fire, is arsoned one night by white supremacists. And the police shows up the next day, and their reaction is basically, bad luck, these things happen, we're sorry, who knows who did it, yeah, be careful, yeah, good luck to you. The second thing that is, and this is something that I've also heard Onkar Gata mentioning it on that beautiful New Ideal episode. I mean, beautiful, I was in it, so I'm biased, that he did on racism, that don't focus only on the fact that there were bad laws, that there were the Jim Crow laws. Also focus on the fact that even the laws that were applying supposedly to everyone, the police quite often was very reluctant to enforce them. So the police shows up to the arson house. It's clear that there were some white supremacists who did it. There were particular groups, and it was a relatively small society. Everyone knew each other, but they were like, well, what can we do? And then his father gets murdered. So at a relatively early age, he finds his father murdered. Now, everyone in the family believes that this is the work of white supremacists. Again, his father is active in the Black movement. He was a targeted man. The police says, well, who knows, maybe it was a drunken fight or whatever. His head was bashed. Again, no one can know what happened. So he is losing his father, and as if this is not enough, his mother is taken away from him because the authorities take her away and put her to a mental institution. Official version is she had serious mental health issues. Malcolm's version is that the authorities were way, way, way too eager to take her away. And then again, to put into perspective the whole atmosphere of that time, Malcolm goes to school And he goes from relative to relative. Then he finds a foster family. And in the schools, there's one teacher who likes Malcolm. And one day, just before high school, that teacher invites Malcolm to his office. And Malcolm says, I want to become a lawyer. This is what I want to do with my life. Because the teacher says, look, you're a very promising young man. Tell us what you want to do. And the teacher pauses, thinks, looks uncomfortable. And I'm not going to use the actual term that the teacher used, but the teacher basically says, look, Malcolm, black men, he didn't say black men don't become lawyers. So, there are other things. You can be a carpenter. There are other things you can do with your life. So Malcolm grows up with this fierce frustration towards the society. It has taken away literally his father. It has burned his house. It has taken away his mother. And he goes to a school where even people who love him tell him that people like you, you can't do, you're a good kid, but you can't do much in life. So let's pause here, Mark. And is there an excuse? I mean, everyone has free will and they can make up their own mind. But even if Malcolm from this ends up being the worst person with the worst views, are we cutting some slack with this upbringing, or shall we say, no, there's free will, you should have done something better? What's your take on this?
Yeah, of course we cut him slack because he had no contrast, right? Even the one representative of white society that gave him credit for being as intelligent and as advanced as he was, still put the boot on his neck by saying, you're not going to amount to anything. You can't. It's impossible in this world. So, I mean, for anyone to make any clear conceptual choices, you need compare and contrast. And he was getting one message from the time he was a small child, and his father reflecting justifiable rage at a society that was marginalizing them, murdering them. I hesitate to think of any moral person who would not come to the same conclusion.
So what happens then is that Malcolm leaves this society of the South. He goes on the North. He spends his time between New York and Boston, and then he sees a new world. He sees a world where he can walk around and not be openly intimidated. He sees a world of jazz, of music, of dancing, and he's immersed in this world. Of course, he still has this fury inside him, and he still has this outlook towards white society. He lives literally among prostitutes and hustlers, and he learns a lot about life from them. Actually, the book is full of what back today would be, of course, canceled as sexist, but he has a lot of quote advice from women and all that stuff. And he says, I've learned from prostitutes. And this is something very important because they would tell me why men leave their wives and go to the prostitute. So again, the book, from any point of view you see it, it's quite interesting in portraying that particularly period. Of course, at the same time, he has this constant culture of excuses for Black people. And here is an example. And excuses to the point where you wonder, is this good advice to give Black people? So here's a quote. Almost everyone in Harlem needed some kind of hustle to survive and needed to stay high in some way to forget what they had to do to survive. So this is how he gives an explanation for the very widespread, about the widespread drug use. And later he said, quote, I got my first schooling about the cesspool morals of the white man from the best possible source, from his own women. So Malcolm was a womanizer. He liked to, or it quite happened that the woman of a white man would go and sleep with him because he was a charming person. He was attractive. And even that, he sees it from racial lines. He says, white women are like that, and who knows what the white man does to them back at home, and that's why they come to me. So everything he does is everything he sees is through this prism of race. And this is also poisoning his relationship with a woman that seemed to be important in his life, a white woman called Sophia. And again, what a tragedy that even his interactions with her, in his eyes, were poisoned by the racial outlook. Listen to this line where he reflects on his relationship with Sophia. Quote. Now, again, I cannot use the N-word when I'll use the term black men. The irony is that those white women had no more respect for those black men that white men had for the black women they had been, quote, using since slavery time. And in turn, blacks have no more respect for the whites they get into bed with. I know the way I felt about Sophia, who still came to New York whenever I called her. So a woman is in love with him, travels from New York to Boston to see him, but for Malcolm X, he's just a white body, and he cannot see her as anything else. So he's stuck to this worldview, he's stuck to this racial outlook. And this is the time, Mark, where he gets into a world of drugs, and he starts also with petty crime, and he starts with hustling, and then it becomes more, he becomes a burglar. And there are women in his life that are so enamored with him, that they're so attracted, that they're so magnetized by him, that they even follow him in his crime career. And this actually turns into his disadvantage, because when he's arrested, the fact that he's sleeping with white women, and the fact that these white women are, as he described it, cuckolding their men with him, in the eyes of the court, the judge doesn't like this at all. So they give him an even harsher sentence. So Malcolm X are in the late 40s, find himself in prison, facing his addictions and the fierce anger that he have, and also feeling let down from the system. So he finds himself in an absolute nadir, and this is the background for what you, Mark, described as his first redemption. Happy to take any comments so that I can have a quick look on the super chats.
Yeah, I still don't really blame him too much. He's a young man, and he's been his soul has been crushed by the social order in the South where he grew up. So coming to the North, it's ideas, once they're implanted in you, are hard to get rid of. And it takes a conscious effort. Sometimes, like he experienced, unfortunately, with Elijah Muhammad, a rebirth, a religious rebirth, just with the wrong guy that sort of, I think, more or less sees eye to eye with his racial hatred and segregation.
Well, we'll get to that. And as you said, he hasn't experienced anything else. So he goes from basically elementary school, and then his next teachers are hustlers, pimps, and the crime worlds of Boston and New York. So, but let's go to his prison life, because here are where things start becoming really exciting. And a big thank you to Kmetia, a big thank you to Marlene, a big thank you to Regina. Thank you so much for your support. So in prison, again, he's so angry, he's so bitter, he's so fiercely furious that he gets the nickname the Satan. Now, to get that nickname in prison, imagine what was the situation. And he knows that he's in a nadir. He knows that he's in a low point. He has issues with his drugs. He can't get the drugs. He was in a crazy mixture of drugs. And at this absolute low, someone talks to him about Allah and about the Nation of Islam. And he starts getting letters from his family talking about this Nation of Islam. This was a group, we'd probably call it a cult, is a better way to call it. But one after the other, the members of his family start getting linked to the Nation of Islam. But again, he's so angry, he doesn't want to hear anything. But there's one person that he still respects and he looks up to. It's his brother. And his brother one day visits him in prison, and we have the story, we have the discussion, the turning point that changes Malcolm's life forever. I'm going to read it from the book because there's no way I can put it better than he does. So his brother Reginald visits him in prison, and they discuss. Malcolm, says his brother, if a man knew every imaginable thing that there is to know, who would he be? Well, he would have to be some kind of god, says Malcolm X. Reginald said, yeah, there's a man who knows everything. Who is that? God is a man, Reginald said. His real name is Allah. Allah, says Malcolm X. I've heard this before. You're not the first person lately who brings up this thing. The discussion continues. Quote, he told me that this God had come to America and that he had made himself known to a man named Elijah, a black man, just like us. So not only there is a God, but actually he reveals himself to black men. Like, this is unheard of. This God had let Elijah know that the devil's time was up. I didn't know how to think. I just listened. The devil is also a man, Reginald said. What do you mean? With a slight movement of his head, Reginald indicated some white inmates and their visitors talking as we were across the room. Them, he said, the white man is the devil. He told me that all whites knew they were devils, especially Masons. I never will forget. My mind was involuntarily flashing across the entire spectrum of white people I had ever known. And for some reason, I stopped upon Jaime, the Jew, who had been so good to me. So I said, without any exception, says Reginald. So this is the biggest revelation that Malcolm X has, that there is a God, he's black and he reveals himself to blacks, and more importantly, there's a devil. And who is the devil? Every white person, every single one of them. Now, again, in the mindset, in the context that Malcolm X is, this is a yes, this makes sense. And even more important than that revelation, through the Nation of Islam, he finds a path. He finds a discipline, a diet. He gives up smoking, he gives up drugs, he gives up alcohol. When he is outside of prison, he gives up women, except one that he ended up marrying. And this is the biggest thing for him. And the thing was, what was the effects that these ideas had in his life? And for me, this is the major lesson, one of the major lessons from here. Ideas need to have an effect in your life for you to get completely immersed in them, for you to be overwhelmed with them. So, Mark, I'm sure you have things to say on that.
Yeah, well, you're right. I think it provided a structure for him that he needed, but it didn't hurt that it confirmed his worldview already. It fanned his hatred, but it focused it and gave it purpose. And I think a measure of control over his life that he didn't have before, or a sense that control was possible. And that's very powerful. To me, I can, as a white guy sitting back and looking at this historical account that happened decades and decades ago, before I was even born, I can see how empowering that message would be, and how he would be filled with a sense of rebirth and be ready to take on the world after that.
And that's what he literally is up to do. So in 1948, he converts in prison. He becomes an exemplar prisoner because he gets maniacally almost obsessed with one thing, which was to learn. So he says, I'm reading every book I can find. He gets transferred to a prison with a library. And he says, at night, the lights are out, and he sits by the door. So from the keyhole, there's some light so he can keep reading. So he says, I sleep only 3 hours per night because I have to learn everything. So again, it's this thing that wakes up this will for knowledge in his life. And that was the part of the book that I find, to be honest with you, the most inspiring, because from now on we have things that are less inspiring and in my view more reprehensible. But again, when you hear the reprehensible things, keep in mind this context that we set up in the beginning. So what is Nation of Islam? So Nation of Islam offers an alternative history, basically a fake history. It's basically a conspiracy theory group that says that everything stems from the black race. It sees the white race mostly how anti-Semites see the Jews. It's a separatist movement. You could easily call it a hate movement. And again, there is the context of the racism of that time, but this movement was completely beyond the pale. So he becomes slowly more and more prominent in the Nation of Islam for two reasons. One is his charisma, his skill. He becomes a great orator, but also he's very brave. And that's the second thing. So when, for example, black people are beaten by the police and they're in the police department lying half dead, Malcolm goes there and says, bring them to us, take them to the doctor, otherwise I'm bringing 4,000 people outside. So he was a great activist. He was a great mobilizer. And this is what slowly takes him up in the hierarchy of the Nation of Islam. He becomes internationally prominent. Fidel Castro, for example, when he meets, when he goes to New York for the United Nations meeting, he goes to Harlem, he meets with them, he meets with many African leaders. It's the time of Pan-Africanism, the movement that says that all Africa is basically one race and not how to put it, like one oppressed group that needs to unite. This was a big idea back then. And this is what a typical speech and the typical message by Malcolm X sounded like, which is why I said that we're going to see some stuff which is a bit reprehensible. So how he would start a talk. My beautiful black brothers and sisters. And when we say black, we mean everything non-white, brothers and sisters. Because look at your skins. We're all black to the white man. We're 1,001 different colors. Turn around, look at each other. What shade of black, African, polluted by devil white men are you? So there are no white people, there is the white man, and he is the devil. He always goes with the adjective the devil. From another speech. Do you know why the white man really hates you? It's because every time he sees your face, he sees a mirror of his crime. And his guilty consciousness can't bear to face it. Every white man in America, when he looks into a black man's eye, should fall to his knees and say, I'm sorry. My kind has committed history's greatest crime against your kind. Will you give me the chance to atone? Again, very justified rage, but this is racism at its purest. This is collectivism. Every white person is guilty for the crimes of slavery. Or listen to this from another speech. Every time you see a white man, think about the devil you're seeing. Think of how it was on your slave foreparents' bloody, sweaty backs that he built this empire that's today the richest of all nations, where his evil and his greed caused him to be hated around the world. So these are the politics of Nation of Islam, and this is why we become witnesses to things that today would consider absolutely unimaginable, which is, for example, the Nation of Islam and neo-Nazis coming together, having conferences together. And when I say neo-Nazis, I don't mean kind of alt-right. I mean people who would end their speech by saluting Aryan, doing the Aryan salute and saying Heil Hitler. And the idea was, look, we both know that we can't live together. We both want the same thing, which is to separate from each other. So Malcolm X was openly a black separatist. And when they would tell him, but aren't you the same as white segregationists? He said, no. Segregation is when some forces you to be alone and on your side. Separation is when you do it voluntarily because you realize that there's nothing else to be done. Now, a question would be, how would Malcolm X see the progress that was being made these years? And the answer is he was very unimpressed. So, for example, he was very unimpressed with Dr. King, with Martin Luther King. He calls the march to Washington farce to Washington because he believes that there is no peaceful solution. And actually, he believes no progress is possible. Listen how he replies to a reporter who tells him, but look, Mr. Malcolm X, there is progress around you. And this is what he said, quote, no quote because I have the wrong pages. So, okay. But the point is this. The point is there is no progress. There is only tokenism. So he would say, you are showing me, oh, there's one black man in the university. Well, who cares? You've been oppressing her for all these years, and this is not any real progress. And Mark, notice how today, half a century later, many people, although there is progress all around us, basically say the same thing. This society is beyond the pale. This society cannot be redeemed. So this is a sad legacy from the thought of Malcolm X. We've seen some inspiring stuff. This is not inspiring at all. This idea that there can be no change because the white man is going to be like that forever.
I think it's also a legacy of utopian thinking. Many of these people don't compare the present to the past. They compare it to an ideal that they have in their head, what should be, which of course isn't attainable. There's no way you're going to wipe racism off the face of the earth. If there's an easy way to judge people, somebody is going to do it somewhere in the world. And there's nothing easier than to judge somebody's character by the color of his skin. It's concrete. It's right in front of you. It requires no thought at all. And so as long as there are those easy shortcuts, somebody's going to take them. And still, I still don't think he's had the contrast yet that he needs, that he experiences later on in his life, where he sees that ideas unify people, right? Ideas are the cohesion that makes people of various races, creeds, and economic stations come together.
And actually, it's not even that he had a utopian vision, because he's so angry at that point that his only idea is we have to leave, even within the US or someone else, but we have to leave. So it's at the moment, it's mostly a negative. And listen also to his, I think the most, and I say also in the tribalism book, what's the worst thing of this tribalist outlook? It's not your politics, but it's what it does to your own life and to your own relationship with people. So here is how Malcolm talks about interracial marriage, quote, and here we're at some point in the early 60s, quote, I'm right with Southern white men who believe that you can have so-called, quote, integration, at least not for long, without intermarriage increasing. And what good is this for anyone? He means interracial marriage. Let's again face reality. In a world as color hostile as this, man or woman, black or white, what do they want with a mate of the other race? And then he says, what we arrive at is that integration, quote, integration socially, is no good for either side. In quote, integration ultimately would destroy the white race and destroy the black race. Now you would say, who says this? This must be like a very fanatical white supremacist to say this. But this is the celebrated Malcolm X. So again, we gave the context, why he's so angry, why he's hostile. But at this point, he's almost 40. So I would start seriously stop cutting him slack towards that point, although this is, as you said, it's not far from his redemption. Before we go to redemption, let's read as a cliffhanger some super chats. A big thank you to all the super chatters. Thank you, Eric, who finds this fascinating. Thank you. That's encouraging. Allison says, fun fact, Killmonger from Marvel's Black Panther movie is shaped after Malcolm X's legacy. Keep up the good work, guys. Thank you very much, Alison. Yes, I've heard this. And actually, I haven't watched the film. And I haven't watched the film with Malcolm, the film about Malcolm X's life, but I've heard it's a good one. And thank you very much, Jonathan, for all this. So he doesn't believe in progress. Again, he is this black separatist. And then something starts happening. And as it usually happens, Mark, before you challenge your ideas, you challenge your idols. It's first something is wrong with the movement, and then you start challenging the ideas. So he starts challenging Elijah Muhammad. And it starts with the fact and the rumors that Elijah Muhammad is a womanizer. How could it be the prophet? So he goes and meets him, and it's hilarious because what Elijah Muhammad tells him is, look, I did it. But this shows you that I'm really the prophet. Because don't you remember these stories from the Bible or whatever holy book he gives up, where the prophet is falling to sin with women? Well, the fact that I'm sleeping with women should make you 100% sure that I am indeed the prophet. So Malcolm is like, yeah, that doesn't sound too convincing. And there are some other issues. And when Kennedy is assassinated, Malcolm makes a comment. He says the chickens have come home to roost, which compared to the things you've said in the past, I don't find it even particularly controversial. But Elijah Muhammad finds an excuse to kick him out of the movement. And now he finds himself outside of the Nation of Islam. People, to give you context what this meant, I mean, this was a movement with tens of thousands of people. Imagine today Yaron Brook breaks links with the Ayn Rand Institute. I mean, it would be that big if Malcolm X, the #1 most prominent spokesperson of the Nation of Islam, would break with the Nation of Islam. So no one could believe it. Everyone's wondering what happened. And Malcolm at that point needs a break. And that break comes with the opportunity of a trip to Mecca, where in the spring of 1964, and he gets some money from his sister, actually, because although he's been so prominent, he hasn't got much money because all his money goes to the Nation of Islam. He's 100% dedicated to the cause. So he travels to Saudi Arabia, he travels to Mecca, and then he has, let's say, his second rebirth. And as you said, Mark, it's this universalism that he finds appealing in Islam. So for the first time, in the airports, in the stations going to the pilgrimage, he sees white people and he's like, wait a minute, I don't hate you and you don't hate me. And he says, I see people from all the races and I can't hate them because they're brothers. Now, we could say that religion is a Fox universalism. It's just collectivism at a different level. I mean, okay, obviously we get that. We're objectivists, yeah. But grasp the message here. The message is universalism gave him this view that, yeah, actually I was wrong. My tribalism was wrong. So he has this kind of awakening of consciousness. Now, don't imagine that he becomes like an advocate of individual rights and of individualism, but he sees some of the mistakes in the past. So he stops calling the white man the devil. For the first time, he allows white people in he has formed a new group and he allows some white people there, but he knows that he's basically a dead man because Elijah Muhammad is not fooling around. He has a lot of thugs in his group. Part of his group was being a militia for self-defense, which you could say is understandable in the times, but he could turn this militia against Malcolm X, and he knew it. And in February 1965, again, in a day like today, 21st of February, he's assassinated. Now, it's unclear who was involved in it. The main gunman, there's no question he was from the Nation of Islam. There's a lot of gray area on who the other people were. There are also conspiracy theories. But I think there's no question that Elijah Muhammad wanted him dead. He knew it. Basically, everyone knew it. That iconic photo, which you might have seen with Malcolm X with a rifle, he's not protecting himself against white supremacists. He's protecting himself against Nation of Islam thugs, because he became almost paranoid towards the end of the life. and with very good reason, because they got him and they murdered him. So that's the story of Malcolm X. And I'm going to tell you my 3 final takeaways, Mark, and then I'll leave the last word to you. One is that how important it is to be charismatic as a personality. So Malcolm X is absolutely mediocre as a thinker, absolutely mediocre as a theorist or whatever. But he has the charisma as a person, and he's a great communicator, and we remember him till today. The second takeaway is the importance of ideas, first of all, in how they change your life. And because he became a better person through his involvement with an otherwise horrendous group, he became so passionate around it. And the third is this interesting kind of second redemption and how the universalist meaning showed him a different way. And who knows what would have happened. Again, I don't have very high hopes. It's not that he became an individualist, but at least this overt racism of his Nation of Islam days were not there anymore. So what's your overall take now that the story is complete?
I would have really loved to have known what he would think about our situation today and how he would have evolved today. I think he was a moral purist and enough of one to see through the race baiters like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. I don't think he would have joined that crew. I think he would have found another way. So, I think, that chapter is going to be unwritten, and unfortunately we won't get to see how he evolved. And I think he was smart enough to evolve even further than he did. And I think this should be an object lesson to anyone who's trying to start a movement, particularly objectivists. You gotta be cool. You gotta be interesting. You gotta have a story. You gotta know how to tell it, and do it in a way that sticks. There's lines that Malcolm X said that stick. About Plymouth Rock landing on us. That kind of stuff. Was that Malcolm X or Elijah Muhammad?
I'm not 100% sure.
We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Whoever said it, that was a memorable line, and objectivists could come up with something as good, as interesting, as lasting as something like that has a lot of emotional punch. And so we could take a page out of Malcolm X's book and adopt it for our own purposes.
And guess who did that? Ayn Rand did exactly this, right? She portrays heroic figures. She portrays people who, the moment she introduces us to these figures, we already get the sense, okay, this guy is the deal. Remember what she says about Francisco? It's as if he's walking and there's a cape flying behind him. Like, wow, this guy is cool. I want to see what's the deal with this guy. I think in objectivism, mostly we get it. In the freedom movement, not that much. And I was tweeting today about it, where I was thinking about this, that you want some heroism to inspire people. You can't inspire people only with numbers, GDP, graphs. And it's not that people are stupid or that people are not thinking, but you want this heroic vision. Again, remember, people were talking to Malcolm X about Allah, and he couldn't care less. But when he realized, oh, this is about my life, I can change my life with this. This is when it clicked. And for me, that's one of the big takeaway. Anyway, again, I was reading from the autobiography of Malcolm X. Even if you despise his ideas and politics, I was many times disgusted while reading it. It's a fascinating read, and it's a fascinating story. So you can check it out. It's also very good in Audible, by the way. I read the book and then I was also listening to Audible. Very good in Audible.
Who does the reading in the Audible? Do you know?
I don't remember. But whoever does it, he's very, very good. It's probably the second best Audible after the Fountainhead, the European version, because it's not the same in Europe and the US. So final comments. Thank you very much, Marilyn. Robert says, so when fighting a massive injustice, is it proper to engage in actions which, as a side effect, violate rights of others? Thank you for opening this can of worms 40 minutes in the episode. An obvious tie into current events. And if not, what the hell do you expect such a man to do? So this is obviously very much related to the trackers issue. So Robert, what I will say is, it depends. It's difficult. So okay, I'm not checking out from it. All I'm saying is we're having a whole discussion on Thursday on the collective, not so much on the issue of the trackers per se, but how to think about these topics where it makes sense within objectivists to disagree. I'm leaning towards there comes a point where it's impossible to overthrow a tyrannical regime without impacting other people. Now, impacting, it can differ. I mean, there are people who blow up innocents and say, well, you know, I had to do it. And remember what Ragnar does in Atlas Shrugged. He sinks the ships of the government, but he makes sure that people, you know, the people who are there, get to the shore safe, because it's, you know, they're not the ones to blame. So it's a huge topic, and we would need hours and hours and hours and hours.
Topic, and I think there's a great deal of confusion today because the private sector and the establishment, the media establishment, the education establishment are so intertwined with the government now that when a social media platform deplatforms somebody or edits their speech or something like that, it does smack of doing the bidding of the government, and so these are the lines that are supposed to represent our retaliatory force against the government when they start prohibiting what we can say and how we can say it. Those are the lines that they've crossed where you might have to pick up the musket. So I've gone back and forth on the truck. What's that?
One thing though, in that case, again, your number one target though should still be the government. So if we knew that the government is strong arming a company to kind of get to you, again, your focus would be, okay, it starts with these people. So because quite often
But then again, I think of a war like the Civil War, which dragged on for 4 years because it was governments sort of attacking each other, and it wasn't until Sherman took the war to the planter class and started really punishing them for what they brought to the world that the entire question of maintaining the war started to be asked, and they started to crumble. And the same can be said in World War II. You know, governments attack each other, but you know, was it appropriate to bomb Dresden or Nagasaki or any industrial center where people are manufacturing weapons to maintain the war, where there's still nonetheless a vast population supporting that cause? You know,
so you see, there's so much to important questions there. So my quick answer would be it's not the same, but I totally get what you're saying, that when we attack Nagasaki, we tell the civilians, sorry, what we're interrupting you, but we aren't really sorry. It's your government's fault. So I get what you're saying, but again, the context is different. So I won't enter this discussion. I'll just say one thing, Robert. Notice that here we're not criticizing what Malcolm X did. We criticize what he said. So if you get your muskets, as Mark said, at least a starting point is that you have the right ideas. So the problem is when you get your muskets, as Malcolm mostly figuratively did, because he didn't lead an actual armed revolt, but he also had the completely wrong ideas. He had a very legitimate anger towards a very legitimate injustice, but with completely the wrong ideas. Mark, sorry, I'm rushing this to the end. It's just that we are 45 minutes in, and this is going to be the Thursday's topic, if I'm not wrong. So we're going to have a chance to discuss it, because this is going to need hours and hours.
It is, and there's many prominent objectivists, including you, who are on opposite sides of the fence of this. So I'm very interested in hearing how this discussion goes.
Good. Hopefully it's not gonna lead to like drama. Okay. 8 p.m. UK time, reverse engineering happiness with Tal and Amanda. 9 p.m. tonight, HBTV, property rights, why and when. And at 10 p.m. UK time, I have to be so careful not to spoil this. So London conference announcement with Razi and a special guest. I have to make sure I don't give up who the special guest is. And now all I'm thinking is the name of the special guest. So I'll just shut up and I'll say good night or good day to you before I give up the secret. Mark, that was great fun. Thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
Thanks. Bye-bye.